All right, so get ready to maybe brush up on a little French because today we are diving headfirst into
Montreal.
Montreal. Exactly.
Later Cohen's Montreal.
Yes. And this is going to be cool because it's not just like, oh, here's where he ate bagels. Here's, like a typical, what did they call them?
Right.
Those tourist maps?
Tourist traps.
Yeah, tourist trap.
But we've got something much more interesting, don't we?
We do. It's a blog post called Legendary Leonard Cohen Montreal Map. And what really struck me about this, and I think we've talked about this before, is like sometimes you get source material and it's like kind of academic and dry, but this one is so personal.
Yes.
This blogger is like weaving in her own like experiences listening to Leonard Cohen growing up. And it's
Well, and you know what really struck me was that she talks about how his first album, Songs of Leonard Cohen, was stolen.
I know.
Not once, but twice.
Twice. Can you imagine? That's like, ouch.
It really speaks to how his music, like, embeds itself in you.
Becomes part of your DNA.
Yes.
Like you can't separate.
And so then these locations that we're going to be talking about, they're not just travel destinations anymore. They become really meaningful.
That's true. It's like the backdrop of your youth. It's all infused with like, oh, Leonard Cohen walked here. Or...
Exactly. Think about like the music or the books that were really influential for you when you were younger. Like those artists, they become so intertwined with those places.
Yeah.
That first concert you went to in your hometown or that park bench where you sat and read your favorite book, they become touchstones, don't they?
They do. And speaking of touchstones, this blog is kind of like almost like a scavenger hunt.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, go to Crescent Street. There's that huge Leonard Cohen mural. Then there's all this stuff about Montreal nightlife, which of course,
Just like his songs.
just like his songs, Closing Time instantly came to mind.
And that's where these seemingly random places start to connect.
Right.
They're not just points on a map anymore. They become clues.
Right, like a puzzle.
Yes.
And you're putting the pieces together.
You're tracing the themes of his work across the entire city, and each location unlocks a new layer of understanding.
And some of those layers are like, oh, okay, didn't expect that. Like the blog even mentions his final resting place,
Right.
which is right there in Montreal.
Of course. Of course.
But it's like a cemetery. That's not usually the first place you think of when you think musical pilgrimage.
I don't know. It shouldn't be that surprising.
Okay.
People go to Jim Morrison's grave all the time.
This is true. This is true.
It's about feeling connected. You feel this intense connection with these artists, and so you want to pay your respects.
Yeah, and even in death, it's like you're making that pilgrimage.
Yes.
And you know what gets me? She even points out the inscription on his tombstone, which is Leonard Cohen, 1934-2016, father, poet, musician. Like, it's so simple.
So evocative, though.
Isn't it? It's
Yeah.
just those three things, but it just speaks volumes.
And that's where I think this travel blog, it just takes this really interesting turn.
Mm.
Because now we're not just looking at locations. We're talking about legacy. We're talking about this relationship between the artist, the art, and the audience. And all that's playing out against this city that clearly loves Leonard Cohen.
And we're not even done yet. Because she doesn't just talk about like, oh, here's where he lived and here's where he's buried. She goes into how he actually used Montreal.
Yes.
Like specifically, she mentions the poem Suzanne.
Which, might I add, is on the album that she had stolen twice.
I know.
The album makes a reappearance.
Right. This album is like meant to be in her life. But Suzanne, I mean, that's not just set in Montreal.
Right.
The city is like a character.
Exactly.
Like she mentions St. Laurent Boulevard. She mentions, get this, the student protests of 68.
Wow.
I know. So it's like all of these things are suddenly like
bringing it to life.
bringing it to life. It's funny, right? We start with this like little travel blog.
Yeah.
And suddenly we're talking about like big ideas, stolen albums,
The
pilgrimages.
spirit of a city.
Right.
It's amazing what happens when you just like dig a little deeper.
It is. You start to like uncover these
Connections.
Yes.
Yeah.
Connections, like where you least expect them.
Yeah.
Speaking of connections, one thing that really struck me towards the end of the blog post, it was almost like a hopeful note.
Okay.
It's talking about, how Montreal is celebrating Leonard Cohen today.
Oh, I see.
Like there are murals, there's a street named after him.
Right.
And it makes you wonder, is this just a city kind of like cashing in on a famous name,
Right.
or is it something more?
That's a good question. It is a good question because especially like nowadays, everyone's obsessed with celebrity,
Yeah.
But here's the thing. I think art has this really special way of like it outlives the artist,
This is true.
and how we choose to remember it
Right.
and celebrate that art, well, that's up to us.
We become the inheritors of
Yeah,
that legacy.
exactly. That's a great way of putting it, because it's not passive.
Right.
It's not just, oh, we inherit this thing. It's like, no, we're handed something really precious, and it's up to us what we do with it.
Okay, I like that. Inheritors of legacy. I'm going to write that down. But it's interesting because it made me think, like, when a city like Montreal chooses to memorialize somebody,
Yeah.
it's almost like they're making a statement
They are.
about their values. It's
Yeah.
like, this person, these words, this music, this matters.
It's part of who we are.
Right. They're basically writing it into their DNA.
Yeah.
Which I think is kind of cool. And that's something that, you don't have to be a Leonard Cohen fan to vibe with that.
Exactly. Exactly.
It's just, it's about respect. It's about recognizing, the impact that art and artists can have. And it made me think, what about our own cities and towns?
Yeah.
What are the legacies that have shaped, the places where we live?
Whose stories are being told?
Yeah.
And more importantly, whose voices are we missing?
Ooh, that's good. Okay, so as we kind of wander further down this path,
Yes.
let's use Suzanne as our guide, because I know we keep coming back to this poem, but it's for a good reason, because I think it perfectly illustrates what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Because it's not just, a love letter to a person. It's a love letter to Montreal itself.
Absolutely.
And it really shows how a place
Yeah.
can actually infuse a piece of art.
With meaning.
Yes. With like deeper meaning.
With like a magical significance almost.
Right. It's not just like, oh, the river. It's like, no, this river.
Yes.
Where, certain things happen.
Yes, exactly.
Or the street corner where they, had this encounter.
And Suzanne doesn't shy away from some of the less glamorous sides of Montreal either. Like, remember how the blog mentioned that it references the student protests of '68?
Yes.
That's weaving in, like, the social and political context right into the art itself.
So suddenly, it's not just a romantic stroll, down by the water. It's like...
There's a lot going on.
There's history.
Yes.
There's like a historical backdrop. It's almost like it's asking us to look deeper, don't you think?
I do.
To consider that historical backdrop in the art that we're consuming. Like what was happening at the time.
Absolutely.
What movements, what events.
What injustices even.
Right. Were happening that might be present.
Right there on the surface.
Yes. Even if we don't realize it.
Or bubbling under,
Yes. And that's the thing. It's like we don't even always know. It's like we have to be...
Active listeners.
Yes.
Engaged.
Okay, so as we start to think about, like, okay, wrapping up our deep dive here into Leonard Cohen's Montreal, what would you say, like, the one big takeaway you want to leave our listeners with is it's about, like, opening your ears.
Yes.
Opening your eyes, paying attention. And not just to the art itself,
right.
but to, like, the places that give it life.
Yes.
And I don't just mean, like, physical locations,
No.
I'm talking about, like...
the emotional landscape.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. The historical echoes, all those things that make a place unique.
Because when you do that, the art just becomes more than just like a song on the radio or a poem on a page.
It's an experience.
It's a conversation starter.
Ooh, I like that.
It's a window into like who you are.
Right. And maybe even like a bridge to understanding like other people.
The world.
Yes.
The wider world.
It's like that aha moment when you realize like, oh, wait a minute.
Yeah.
My favorite artist, like, they walked these same streets.
Yes.
They felt this energy.
Felt this energy.
Maybe they even struggled with, like, the same questions that I'm struggling with right now.
Exactly.
It's kind of a beautiful thought when you really think about it.
And it makes the art, like, intensely personal.
It does. And that's the beauty of it, I think, right? Like, art has this incredible power.
It does. It does.
To connect us.
Yes.
Across time, across space.
It reminds us that, like, even though we might be separated by, generations or miles, thousands of miles.
Experience.
Yeah, experiences, that we do share this common human thread.
Yes, we do. We do. And sometimes, it just takes a single poem set against the backdrop of a city like Montreal to make us really feel that connection.
That's beautiful.
So as we say au revoir to Leonard Cohen.
Au revoir.
And the streets that inspired him.
Yes.
Let's remember that.
Every place has a story.
Ooh, I like that.
Every city, every town, even our own little corners of the world.
Yes. They all have something to say.
What are the hidden gems in your life, woven into the fabric of your everyday existence? What art is echoing through your memories? What places can you just not separate from the books and the music that you love?
It's funny you should say that because now I'm thinking, like, what if this deep dive inspires somebody to, like, go out and create some art?
Wouldn't that be something?
Like,
Yeah.
write a love letter to your city.
Yes.
Song about that street corner that you always walk by.
Each of us adding our own verse to the symphony of human experience.
Beautifully said. And on that note, I think we'll wrap up our deep dive into the heart of Montreal
I think
for
so.
this week. But, the conversation never really ends.
Yeah. Never, never, never.
So until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning.
Keep those deep dives going.
Exactly. No matter where your journeys may lead.